There is a piece of advice that has been repeated so many times that most men have never stopped to question whether it actually works. You've heard it. Everyone has. Someone disrespects you in a meeting, at a dinner table, in front of people you care about, and the advice is always the same. Be the bigger man. Rise above it. Walk away. Don't give them the satisfaction. And here's the thing. On the surface, that sounds like wisdom. It sounds mature. It sounds like something a therapist would say. But here is what nobody tells you about what actually happens when you follow that advice. The person who disrespected you watches you walk away. They nod to themselves, and they file a piece of information away in their brain. That information is this: there is no cost for disrespecting this man. And once that file is open, it never closes. So this video is not about teaching you to blow up, to yell, or to escalate every minor slight into a confrontation. That is the other failure mode, and it's just as destructive. This video is about something different. It's about understanding how the most powerful men in recorded history, men like Augustus Caesar, Elizabeth I, Cosimo de Medici, and Lyndon B. Johnson, actually responded when they were disrespected. What you are going to find is that none of them followed the modern advice, but they also didn't explode. They did something far more sophisticated, and by the end of this video you will understand exactly what that was and how to apply it. Stay with me, because the first thing we need to do is understand why your brain is working against you the moment someone attacks your status. Part 1. The primate problem. Here is a biological fact that modern culture has tried very hard to make you forget. Humans never stopped being primates. Now, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it literally, in the neurological sense. We still carry the ancient social status software that all primates run. And in that software, there is a behavior called a status probe. A status probe is what happens when one primate or one human tests another. It might be a mocking comment in front of colleagues, a belittling remark at dinner, a dismissive tone in a meeting. The content doesn't matter. What matters is the probe itself. Will this person push back, or will they fold? Here is the part that should concern you. The observers, the people watching the exchange, whether they are in the room physically or just socially connected to both parties, their brains are recording the outcome at a level beneath conscious thought. Research published in the journal Psychological Science in studies on status threat and dominant response behavior confirms this. Observers do not interpret silence as maturity. They do not think, what a composed, wise individual. What they actually register without even being aware of it is submission. And once they register submission, their entire future treatment of you recalibrates downward, not out of malice, automatically. The same way a wolf pack adjusts its hierarchy after a challenge. And this is the trap that most men fall into. They have been told that ignoring disrespect is wisdom, when what everyone around them is actually seeing is surrender. So what do most men do instead? They go to the other extreme. Someone disrespects them and they blow up immediately. They snap back, raise their voice, get emotional, make it personal. And here is what that does. It hands the attacker exactly what they wanted. Think about it. If someone wanted to destabilize you, what is the best possible outcome for them? That you lose your composure in public, that you become flustered and reactive, that you look like the irrational one. When you explode, you have surrendered emotional control, which was the entire point of the attack. So on one side, you have the man who goes silent and gets coded as prey. On the other side, you have the man who explodes and hands the attacker a weapon. These are the two failure modes that the modern world keeps pushing men toward, and neither of them is how powerful men actually responded. Let me show you what they actually did. But first, there is a hard neurological limit you need to know about, because it changes everything about the timing of your response. Part 2, the 30-second rule. Behavioral economist George Lowenstein at Carnegie Mellon has spent years studying what he calls the hot-cold empathy gap. The core finding is this: when you are in a hot emotional state, meaning you are angry, humiliated, or threatened, you consistently and predictably misjudge situations. Your assessment of threats is distorted. Your sense of what is proportionate is distorted. Your ability to think strategically is essentially offline. Here is the number that matters. Any decision you make within 30 seconds of being insulted or attacked is a decision made by a version of you who is cognitively impaired, not metaphorically, literally. The prefrontal cortex, which handles long-term thinking, social calibration, and strategic planning, has been flooded out by your stress response system. So the version of you that wants to respond immediately is the least equipped version of you to handle the situation. And this is exactly what history's most powerful men understood. They never responded in the 30-second window, not because they were passive, not because they were afraid, but because they knew that the most dangerous reply is always a cold one. Which brings us to the first doctrine. Part 3, Doctrine 1, the delayed verdict. Cosimo de Medici was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in 15th century Florence. And in 1433, his political enemies, a rival faction called the Albizzi, managed to have him arrested and exiled from the city. This was an enormous public humiliation, the most powerful man in Florence thrown out of his own city. Now, what would the modern advice say? Walk away, be the bigger man, move on with your life. What would the exploding approach say? Fight immediately, make noise, rally supporters. What did Cosimo de Medici actually do? He went quietly. He went to Venice. He made no public protest, no dramatic statements. And then he spent an entire year doing something that nobody saw coming. He quietly called in every loan the Medici Bank held against powerful Florentines. Because the Medici Bank had its hands in nearly every significant financial arrangement in Tuscany. He began very carefully and very quietly, withdrawing credit and calling in debts from the same oligarchs who had been part of the coalition that exiled him. He did not act angry. He acted like a banker doing routine accounting. Within a year, half the Albizzi coalition was financially fractured. The enemies who had seemed so united found themselves unable to cooperate because they were now competing for resources. The coalition fell apart. And Cosimo de Medici was invited back to Florence, where he ruled for the next 30 years. The Albizzi were the ones who ended up exiled. What looks like patience from the outside is in reality weaponized planning. This is what cold anger looks like in practice. It is not the absence of a response. It is the deliberate choice to respond on your own timeline, in a way the attacker never saw coming, through a channel they never anticipated. The rule is simple. Never let the insult choose the time of your answer. Take the attack. Give a short, neutral reply that reveals nothing. Leave, think, and then choose the medium and the timeline that best punishes the behavior while advancing your actual long-term objectives. An unpredictable, delayed response makes you an unmodelable threat. And when people cannot model you, when they cannot predict what you will do, or when they instinctively defer to you. Part 4, Doctrine 2, the asymmetric reply. The second failure mode, beyond exploding and beyond going silent, is what I call the symmetric response. And it might be the most dangerous of all, because it feels satisfying while it is happening. A symmetric response means meeting the attacker at their own level. Someone is petty with you, you are petty back. Someone takes a cheap shot, you take a cheap shot back. Tit for tat, eye for an eye. This feels instinctively right, doesn't it? It feels fair. Here is what it actually does. When you fight symmetrically, you validate the attacker's standing. You are telling the room, this person is my equal. We are playing the same game at the same altitude. And the moment you do that, you have already lost, because the attacker chose this game precisely because they thought they could beat you in it. You stepped onto their terrain. The asymmetric reply means refusing the altitude of the attack entirely, and there are two directions you can go asymmetrically. You can go downward with mercy so complete and so unexpected that it is more unsettling than punishment, or you can go upward with a response so disproportionately large that it does not just answer the attack but permanently restructures the relationship between you. Let me give you both examples, because they are completely different and both of them work. Augustus Caesar discovered that a young Roman nobleman named Lucius Cinna had been conspiring to assassinate him. The expected response, the symmetric response, was execution. That is what Roman emperors did. That is what everyone watching would have expected. Augustus did something else entirely. He called Cinna into a room alone, just the two of them. He laid out every piece of evidence he had. He showed Cinna that he knew everything. the co-conspirators, the timeline, the plan, and then he forgave him completely. He declared them friends. He later gave Cinna a consulship. Now, what does this accomplish? Think about it from the perspective of every senator and nobleman who heard this story afterward. If Augustus can do that, if he has enough confidence in his own position that he can absorb an assassination plot and come out the other side, granting the plotter a consulship, then what does that say about how safe Augustus feels? What does that say about how untouchable he believes himself to be? Cinna became one of his most devoted supporters, and the Roman elite stopped plotting against Augustus, not because they were afraid of death, but because they were afraid of how far above them he was operating. That is the asymmetric reply going downward. Now here is the upward version. Philip II of Spain was not subtle about his contempt for Elizabeth I of England. He called her a heretic, questioned the legitimacy of her throne, and treated her diplomatically like a nuisance. If Elizabeth had written back angry letters, matched his rhetoric, tried to out-insult the most powerful king in Europe, what would that have accomplished? Nothing. It would have validated the argument that she was operating at his level. Elizabeth did not write angry letters. Over the next years, she rebuilt the English Navy. She invested in seamanship, in technology, in the people who would operate these ships, and in 1588, she sank the Spanish Armada. The greatest naval force in the world at the time. Gone. That was her reply. Not a diplomatic note, not a public statement, a completely disproportionate structural response that ended Spain's dominance of the seas. Philip spent the rest of his life dealing with the consequences. The rule here, disrespect is a low-altitude attack designed to drag you into a fistfight on the attacker's terrain. The asymmetric reply means choosing a completely different terrain, one where you have the advantage, and delivering something so disproportionate that the attacker is permanently recalibrated. Fighting symmetrically validates them. Refusing their altitude rewrites the structure of reality between you. Part 5, Doctrine 3, the audience, not the attacker. This is the doctrine that most people completely miss, and it might be the most important one. When someone disrespects you, who are you actually responding to? The instinct says, the person who disrespected you, they said something, you respond to them directly in the moment because that is where the attack came from. But that instinct is wrong, and Lyndon B. Johnson understood exactly why. J. was one of the most effective political operators in American history. Before he became president, he was a Senate Majority Leader who was legendary for getting things done. And he had a very specific philosophy about disrespect that nobody ever said out loud. If a senator challenged him publicly, undercut him in a meeting, or made the mistake of dismissing him in front of colleagues, LBJ never yelled at them. He never confronted them directly. He didn't even make it obvious that anything had happened. What he did, quietly, over the next few weeks, was make a series of phone calls. He would block 2 or 3 pieces of legislation that the offending senator needed. A post office in their home state that was up for approval, quietly delayed. A defense contract their constituents were counting on, suddenly facing unexpected procedural hurdles. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, through back channels, the way a master plumber shuts off water to one specific pipe while the rest of the building keeps running normally. The other senators noticed. Not just what happened to the one senator who crossed LBJ, but that it happened at all. That there was a cost, that the cost was real and quiet and undeniable. What LBJ understood is that you are never just responding to the attacker. You are responding to everyone who is watching the interaction. The attacker is almost irrelevant. What matters is what the audience learns about the price of disrespecting you. Think of yourself as a market maker. When you are disrespected publicly, you are pricing your social standing in real time. If the price of disrespecting you is 0, if nothing ever happens, then disrespect will keep coming because it is free. But if the price is high, unpredictable, and unavoidable, then over time the attacks simply stop. Not because people suddenly respect you more as a person, but because the cost-benefit analysis no longer makes sense for them. What gets built around you is what I call structural quiet. Colleagues interpret it as respect. What it actually is at a deeper level is a low-frequency awareness that interacting with you in bad faith carries consequences that are real and that they cannot fully anticipate. And that awareness keeps the environment clean for you in ways that respect alone never would. Part 6, Doctrine 4. Never explain. This is the shortest doctrine and the one that most men will find the hardest to follow because it cuts directly against something deeply wired in us. When you take an action, when you respond to disrespect in some way, the instinct afterward is to explain yourself, to justify, to share your reasoning, to make sure people understand why you did what you did, so that they can evaluate it properly and hopefully approve of it. And here is the brutal reality. The moment you explain, you have already submitted. Think about what an explanation actually communicates. It says, I am uncertain whether my action was correct. I need your validation. I am submitting my reasoning for your review. You have the authority to judge what I did. Cardinal Richelieu ran the French court for almost 2 decades. He made enemies, he destroyed enemies, he elevated allies and crushed rivals with a precision that made people genuinely afraid of him. Not once did he publish pamphlets explaining his decisions. Not once did he hold court and walk people through his reasoning. He acted, and the world adapted to what he had done. His successor, Cardinal Mazarin, was the same. When people asked him directly, why did you spare that man? Why did you destroy the other? Mazarin would shrug and change the subject. Just a shrug and a pivot to something else. Because kings do not submit their reasoning for public review. And men who operate at that level have learned that an action which requires explanation has already lost its power. The action is the statement. The explanation dilutes it. When someone asks you why you did something, there is a one-sentence answer that works in almost every situation, because it was the right call. And then you stop. You do not elaborate. You do not soften it. You do not defend it. You made a decision. The decision stands, and you have moved on. Any further explanation is a form of submission in disguise. Part 7. Putting it together. What this actually builds. I want to step back for a moment, because I think it's worth being clear about what we are actually talking about here. These 4 doctrines, the delayed verdict, the asymmetric reply, the audience over the attacker, and never explaining, are not tricks. They are not manipulation tactics. They are a coherent philosophy about how status and power actually work in human social systems. Nassim Taleb, the author and philosopher of risk, puts it this way in his work on Skin in the Game. Respect in any social system is a direct function of your believable capacity to create consequences. People who cannot create consequences for you will not respect you because they don't have to. People who can create consequences for you, and who have demonstrated that they will, earn a different kind of relationship from the people around them. The men in this video, Cosimo de Medici, Augustus Caesar, Elizabeth I, Lyndon B. Richelieu, were not feared because they were violent or unpredictable in the chaotic sense. They were respected because the people around them understood that disrespecting them came with a cost. That cost was real. That cost was delivered on the powerful person's timeline. And that cost never looked like what you expected. The goal of internalizing these doctrines is not to make you someone who is constantly watching for disrespect and plotting revenge. It is to reach a point where the question of how to handle disrespect rarely comes up at all. Because you stop being a man who handles disrespect well. You become a man whose presence makes disrespect feel unthinkable in the first place. That is the real target. Structural quiet. Not a reputation for anger. Not a reputation for being tough. A reputation, or more accurately, a wordless understanding in the room that this particular person operates at a level where the usual status games are not a good idea. Let me close with something worth sitting with. The thesis of everything you just watched is this: disrespect unanswered is not peace. It is a down payment on your own destruction. Every time someone tests your status and you give them an answer that costs you nothing to give and costs them nothing to receive, you are training the people around you in how to treat you. And that training compounds. The question you need to take away from this is not, how do I respond to the last disrespect I experienced? The question is, what am I currently teaching the people in my life about the price of my respect? Because the men we talked about today, Cosimo, Augustus, Elizabeth, LBJ, they did not get to their positions by responding correctly to individual moments. They built a relationship over time with the people around them, a relationship defined by a consistent, unspoken understanding that engaging with them in bad faith was structurally inadvisable. If you want to go deeper on the mechanics of how power, status, and social dynamics actually work, not just in historical case studies, but in your daily professional and personal life, there is a related video that covers the psychology of status in modern social hierarchies that I think you will find genuinely useful. It's linked right here. Like this video if it gave you something real to think about. And if you want more content on applied history and the psychology of power, subscribing means you will not miss what's coming next. Because we are just getting started.